Hello. So this is going to be supplementary content for the demo on CollectionViews. Um, we didn't exactly finish everything we wanted to finish during the live lectures, so I'm now recording this, and I'm hopefully going to cover everything we missed. But before actually getting into the demo and coding new stuff, I'm going to spend a little bit of time doing kind of a chalkboard-esque drawing of the general flow and idea of both what we wanted you to kind of get out of the demo and also the new stuff, and then I'll go into coding and then revamp that and work on everything that we didn't complete. So in terms of the actual app that we have basically one screen, and on this screen there are two collection views. I'm going to make it blue. The top collection view, which represents filtering. So each one of these cells is a little button where I can filter the second collection view. So this collection view actually has like the headers, the different items, and the whole idea is that I'll use this collection view to filter the data and like do stuff with the data on that collection view. Now, you've seen me do this probably like 3 or 4 times already, but I'm going to draw out the simple MVC kind of model, which we have our main controller. And the two, I guess, important views for the purpose of this demo will be our two collection views. So here I'm going to say the filter CV, and CV standing for collection view, and I'm going to call this the main CV. Now in our views as well, like this comprises the views, there's going to be other stuff like the cells, the headers, that stuff, so forth. I'm going to just omit that for the sake of simplicity, but that will be there, that exists. For the model, we have at the moment 3 lists. So our first list corresponds to filters. Here we have like the different filters we want to use, and this list kind of directly correlates with this collection view, right? So this first item will be the first thing there, and so forth. I'm kind of just drawing this out because I think it's a good way to generally think about how your model translates to a view, right? And then we have 2 lists down here that correlate to our other collection view. Those 2 lists will be the headers, which again, each one of these, so header might be circle, triangle, square, so forth. Each one of these corresponds to a single header in a section. And then our shapes, which is a 2D array. Each array corresponds to, so like each list corresponds to an entire section, right? And each item in the list corresponds to an item in that section, and then so forth. And then if we had like another header and another section down here, that would be this guy, and whatnot. Cool. So that was basically the MVC drawing of what we had. Now, the fun part, or I guess the newer part of this demo, is that we now have 2 collection views that need to talk to this controller. And as we've established, it does that through the delegate and data source. And now these are collection views. The layout flow delegate thing, I'm not remembering the name off the top of my head. Flow layout delegate? Yeah. So basically through protocols. Those protocols get implemented in the controller. I'm drawing this pink box as the implementation because we commonly use extends, but that's where the stuff like did selects, all of these functions go. We define that in the controller as extensions to the controller. And then these collection views will communicate to that controller by accessing kind of the same channels, right? These guys both need data from this controller, and they do that using the same protocols, the same system. So you're going to end up having both of these guys calling these functions together. That kind of poses a little bit of an excess challenge when we're coding, but nothing too difficult. I guess one interesting thing to think about when dealing with this MVC style drawing, right? This is our controller, now extended. If this is our model and this is our view, the updates in this diagram, I'm going to just make it a little more spacious, start from the view actually. So when the screen loads, it's actually these views that are initializing the like, hey, we're going to show up on screen, we need to know what to display in these boxes. So these guys are going to be the ones that are asking this controller by calling these functions. And then in our controller, that's where we're responsible for basically responding to the CollectionViews request for data by filling it in with like, oh, this is the data that you're supposed to put in your screen and whatnot. So that is more MVC stuff. But now I'll kind of get into a more detailed look at this using actual code stuff. So I'm going to just start writing pseudocode, right? We have our view controller. And in our view controller, we're going to have our two variables, right? We have our variable for filter VC and our variable for the main VC. And these are of type CollectionView, and I should say of type UI CollectionView and UI CollectionView. And I'm not going to write out the full code, but these variables are basically these arrows here, right? So these variables are in our controller. That's our controller saying, hey, we own these collection views. And then, fun thing, we have in our view did load function. That's where, as we've said many times, that's where we set the delegate and data source functions equal to self, right? So when we say something like filter view controller, and then we do this dot delegate equals self, that's basically saying this filter view controller has this delegate variable, right? This delegate variable that represents this arrow that points back to the self being this view controller, right? So this filter view controller's delegate, I'm going to zoom out, is equal to the self, so this guy knows that whenever it needs functions like what's the cell for item at or so forth, that it should be asking this controller. It should be asking self. Nice. Now, I guess the last part of this diagram is that at the very bottom here, which I'm going to just draw on split screen, we have our actual like implementation, which is this pink square, where we say like extension of our view controller with, I think in here I'm going to just use this did select, but again this goes with all of our functions that we've listed out. This extension of view controller maybe is the CollectionViews delegate, and this is where we actually implement functions like did select. You can look at the actual autocomplete and what it says for what's in here, but I'm gonna just draw out like a little, I know that there's like a CV of type UI CV, there's an index path, and so forth. Yeah. And I'm gonna just move this over a little bit. Cool. So in our did select, I guess the whole big idea that we want you to take from this, or one of the big ideas that we want you to take from this demo, was that because these two collection views that we've implemented here are communicating through the same channel, both of these functions are going to end up calling this function here, right? So our main collection view and our filter collection view will be calling this did select, right? And if I click on this cell here, or like this cell here, for example, or even this cell or this cell, all of that gets processed in this code here by our collection view telling the controller, hey, somebody selected at like this index or whatever. And that's why you saw in the demo, we had this nifty if statement, right? If collection view is equal to like our main collection view, or I don't want to switch up the colors. If this collection view is equal to our main collection view, then we run all this code. And if this collection view is not, for example, if it's equal to the filter collection view, then we run all of that code. This basically splits it up, right? Both of these functions are going to be calling this did select function, but the way that we differentiate them is with this parameter here. So we have the parameter that's like collection view of type UI collection view. This of type UI collection view, cool. This collection view variable gets set equal to whichever one of these collection views is actually calling this function, right? So that's why we can check and say, hey, if this collection view is equal to our main collection view, then we know that this guy was the one calling the function and asking for data or whatnot. Or like, if it's equal to filter, then this guy is the one calling this function. And so because both of these collection views call all of our delegate functions, we need kind of this if statement throughout. Cool. So that's basically the high-level overview of what we covered in the demo. There's one other thing that I'd like to add, which is in terms of this actual differentiation. I'm going to just erase stuff and clean it up a little bit. In terms of this actual differentiation, there's another way to do it without actually directly checking whether they're equal to. Our collection views have a parameter called .tag. So in this view controller over here, I can add in code that's like filter collection view. I just realized I inverted these letters, my bad. Filter collection view dot tag, and I can set this equal to numbers. So I can say the filters tag is gonna be 1, and then the main collection views tag is gonna be equal to 0. And then instead of directly comparing against if it's equal to those collection views, I can just over here check what the tag is equal to, where I can say like if cv.tag is equal to 1 then we know that in here all of this code is going to correspond to the filter collection view. Wow, my iPad is really slow. Okay, yeah. All of this code is going to be corresponding to the filter collection view, and else we know that it'll be the other one. So that's another way to do it. I personally think using the tags is beneficial as you start to build apps that use like more collection views throughout. You can kind of tag them, and then you can save these variables as you can save these values as variables so that you're not floating around like using numbers everywhere. and you can like switch on which tag you want to use. That's just one way to think of it. But yeah, so that's basically in full the first part. So the goal of this next part is that we want to have this filter buttons actually update this collection view. And I think this is kind of more of a primer than anything into what we're going to cover next in the next few weeks, which is how do you deal with more advanced systems of models. Right? We spent the last 2 weeks talking about the views, how do you have these nice table views, collection views, and so forth. We eventually want to move on to how do you build really cool apps using interesting models. So the whole idea of using this filter button to update these collection views is you can kind of see, as I tried to draw out earlier in this recorded demo, that these data correspond to the view, right? Like the headers correspond to headers, the shapes correspond to the different actual items in the collection view. And like these views, they really just exist to show the user whatever is in the data, right? If I'm building an app like Eatery, we only have these like collection views that show the eateries to actually show the data that's about those eateries. And we kind of want to have this data first approach when designing apps and building apps. So in something as simple as like implementing the filters, when I select a filter, so that will be in this didSelect function here, what I want to do is I basically want to update the model. That's the first priority. The first priority is I want to change this model to reflect the update, the new filtered update. And once this model is updated correctly, we can just tell these collection views, like collection view reload, like the actual function is reload data, which gets these guys, these collection views, to do the same process of requesting data and then having the controller fill that data in. So if you remember earlier, like the updates stem from the collection view. When something like this happens, the process is we change the model and then we tell the collection view, like, hey, it's time that you can update again. So update based on this new model that we've created. I think just to make the actual coding simpler, and because this is for the sake of building a demo and not building an app that'll actually be interesting, I think that I'm going to make the demo as simple as like moving around these sections, right? So let's say I have 3 different sections on my collection view. I'm kind of drawing it off screen now, but these different sections on my collection view, right? Labeled 0, 1, 2. These buttons, what I want them to do is just switch them out with 0, right? So maybe this button here will switch out the 1 and the 0. We'll switch out the 1 and the 0. Maybe this button will switch out the 2 and the 0. And that moves this entire section like upwards or whatnot. And if we think about the actual model and what needs to happen, is that if we want to make this kind of reflected, we know that our headers list, right, circle, triangle, square, and umbrella, which that'll suffice. Yeah, so our header view has the different shapes, and then our shape view has the corresponding list with all the circles in it, all the triangles in it, and so forth. Okay, yeah. So we have this two-dimensional list that has all of our data in it. So if I wanted to implement a function that basically swaps these two, or like swaps these two, all that I would need to do in the data is like swap these two elements and swap those two elements. And then I'd say, okay, now we can update. And once those are swapped, it'll update with the new order of stuff. And the new order of the collection views. Again, that's like a separate type of filter, is if we do that. Now, in terms of the actual code, the way that I'm going to think about doing it is all of this model stuff is... Actually, I can just scroll down. Okay, cool. Yeah, so the way that I'm going to think about it, all of the model stuff is implemented up here in the view controller. I can just add another function to our view controller, right? That's like... that like switches the order. So swap, and then something to let me know which two I'm swapping. And then this function, its responsibility is to do exactly what we talked about here. So change order of arrays, and then reload the collection view. So nice. That's a, again, pretty simple high-level overview. That would be implementing this at its simplest. I think if we wanted to think about making our app as expandable as possible, if we're building something like eateries where we have a lot of different collection views throughout the app and a lot of different data, it might be useful to separate out this model stuff and this functionality into a separate class entirely that represents like class. I'm gonna just call it shape model. And this class will basically store all the data, and it'll have this functionality that like handles the data. And that way, instead of just having this floating somewhere in the view controller, it's separated out, and we can actively use these arrows as a more like efficient way of communication. But I will demo that more using the actual code. So without further ado, I will start coding.